Welcome. Great to have you here /. Today we are diving into SMSF liquidity requirements and how to keep your fund from drowning in illiquid assets while bills pile up. Stay with us for practical strategies to balance property investments with the cash reserves your fund truly needs.
Self-managed super funds. I mean, who doesn't love the incredible control they give you over your retirement savings? But here's the thing. With all that power comes a huge responsibility. And there's this one danger, this one thing that's so often overlooked that could literally leave your fund high and dry, unable to pay its bills when they're due. So yeah, today we're going to dive into the super important topic of liquidity.
So is your fund drowning in illiquid assets? I know, it's a pretty intense question to ask, isn't it? But look, so many of us are drawn to SMSFs precisely because we get the freedom to invest in things like direct property, and that can be absolutely fantastic for long-term growth. But it can also create this sneaky little trap where your fund looks amazing on paper, really wealthy, but in reality, it's scrambling to pay the day-to-day bills.
All right, so let's talk about the SMSF liquidity trap, that hidden risk behind property-heavy super funds. Here's the deal. As a trustee, you're not just some passive investor. Nope. You are legally on the hook for making sure your fund can pay every single one of its bills on time. And that means managing cash flow, it's every bit as important as chasing those big returns. And believe me, this isn't some tiny niche issue we're talking about. I mean, look at this number. 32%. Nearly a third of all SMSFs in Australia hold direct property. And for a lot of them, property isn't just a part of their portfolio, it is their portfolio. So this risk we're talking about, it's huge and it's widespread. Okay, next section. When the cash dries up. Let's define the problem and its severe consequences. So what actually happens when a fund that looks like it's doing great on paper suddenly hits a cash crunch? Well, that big, healthy asset balance, it means absolutely nothing if you can't pay your tax bill, your loan repayments, or worst of all, your members' pensions. So let's just nail down exactly what we mean by liquidity. In simple terms, it's how easily and quickly your fund's assets can be turned into cold, hard cash, and crucially, without losing a bunch of value in the process. Why? So you can pay all your expenses and bills right as they fall due. It's really that simple, but man, is it critical. And if you get this wrong, well, the consequences are pretty severe. We're talking forced property sales where you have to take a big discount, breaching ATO compliance rules, not being able to pay your tax bills. It's a mess. We saw this play out in real time during the 2020 pandemic, right? Funds that didn't have that cash buffer were pushed into fire sales, basically dumping properties at a loss just to survive. This goes way beyond just getting a bad return. We're talking about breaking the law, delaying pensions, and potentially wrecking someone's entire retirement savings. All right, enough doom and gloom. Now that we get the risks, let's switch gears and talk about solutions. Because the good news is you can absolutely build a financial life raft for your fund. So let's get into the proactive strategies, the stuff you can do to make sure your fund doesn't just survive, but thrives. I love this way of thinking about it. Think of your SMSF cash reserve like an emergency fund for your personal finances. It's so true. This is strategy number one. That cash reserve isn't dead money just sitting there doing nothing. Its job isn't to make you rich with massive returns. Its real job is to be your security blanket, to give you peace of mind and flexibility, so that your other assets, your growth assets, can do their thing without being disturbed. Okay, another really powerful strategy is what you could call a staggered investment approach. It's super simple. Instead of just dumping all your new funds into one thing, you create a system. First, you build your reserve. Maybe 10 to 20% goes right into cash. Then you invest in liquid assets. A good chunk, say 40 to 50%, goes into things like shares or ETFs you can sell quickly. And then the rest, that final 30 or 40%, can go into those big long-term assets like property. See how that works? It creates this incredible balance and makes your fund so much more resilient. All right, let's move on to navigating pension payouts. This is the unique liquidity challenge of the retirement phase. Now, this whole liquidity thing, it gets turned up to 11 when members actually start retiring. Because now, the fund isn't just about growing assets anymore. It's a completely different game. It's about paying out a regular income, and that puts a whole new kind of pressure on your cash flow. And check this out. This pressure just keeps ramping up over time. The law says you have to withdraw a minimum amount each year, and that percentage goes up as you get older. So between 65 and 74, it's 5%. But then it jumps to 6%, then 7%, and by the time you're 85, you're pulling out 9% a year. Let's put that in perspective. On $1 million fund, that 5% is $50 grand a year you need in cash. By age 85, that's $90,000. That's a huge amount of cash you have to find year in, year out. And yet, this is where it gets a little scary. There's this huge and, frankly, pretty dangerous gap between what people worry about and what they actually do. Look at this. 67% of trustees are concerned about liquidity for their pensions. That's 2 out of 3. But only 41% have an actual formal strategy in place. That's a massive disconnect. It's a whole lot of people just crossing their fingers and hoping for the best instead of actually making a plan. So what's the fix? Simple. You need a plan. And there are some great strategies for the pension phase. For example, you could create a dedicated pension pool of liquid assets, enough to cover payments for the next 2 or 3 years. Or you could get clever and align your income, like dividends and rent, with your payment schedule. There's also something called partial commutations, which basically lets you take a chunk as a lump sum for more flexibility. The bottom line is you have to be intentional about it. Okay, let's pull all these threads together now into what we can call the Resilient Fund Blueprint, crafting a strategy for both growth and security. Because here's something you really need to remember. Your investment strategy isn't just a nice-to-have document. It's a legal requirement from the ATO, and it must address liquidity. A truly strong, resilient fund is built on a blueprint that perfectly balances that drive for growth with the absolute need for security. And a fantastic way to think about this is a 3-tiered approach. It's super clear. So, Tier 1, that's your rock-solid foundation. Highly liquid cash and term deposits for all your immediate needs and emergencies. Tier 2 is your moderately liquid stuff, like listed shares and ETFs, things you can turn into cash within a few days. And then Tier 3 is for the big guns, the long-term growth assets like property or private equity. When you structure your portfolio like this, you're building in layers of financial defense. So, you've got a plan. But how do you know if it'll actually work? You've got to stress test it. It's time to ask some tough what-if questions. Seriously, what would you do if a major repair cost you $50,000 right now? What if your rental income just vanished for 6 months? Running through these kinds of scenarios, that's how you find the cracks in your plan before they turn into a full-blown crisis. When you boil it all down, it really comes down to 2 different ways of thinking, 2 completely different approaches. You can be reactive, which leads to nothing but stress, anxiety, and being forced into bad decisions. Or you can be proactive. And that approach, that leads to security, peace of mind, strategic choices, and a fund that's genuinely built to last. The difference isn't just significant, it's everything. So, if there's one thing you take away from all of this, let it be this. A documented, regularly reviewed liquidity plan, it isn't about being overly cautious or limiting your returns. Not at all. It's the complete opposite. It's about building such a strong, unshakable foundation that your growth assets have the freedom and the time they need to truly perform. It's what ensures your fund can weather any storm and come out stronger. And that brings us to one last, very important question. After everything we've just talked about, I want you to take a really honest look at your own SMSF. Is your fund genuinely built to float, or is it in danger of sinking the next time the tide turns?